Hello, I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Dr. Helen Yitah today. Helen is here as part of an exchange between Justus Liebig University in Gießen in Germany and her home university, the University of Ghana in Accra in Ghana. Helen is Professor of English at the University of Ghana, and her research interests and teaching interests very much concentrate on West African literature, particularly Ghanaian oral and written literature. We are very happy to have Helen teach here at Gießen as well. She's teaching on the West African Literature and Culture Seminar, and she has agreed to talk to us about Ghana and its colonial history, on education in Ghana and the role of English, and on her own research interests, West African literature. And we are very happy to have her here. Thank you, Helen, for talking to us, and we're very interested to hear about Ghana.
Geographically, Ghana is positioned in the middle of Ivory Coast and Togo, with Togo to the east and Ivory Coast to the west. And then in the north, you have Burkina Faso. And to the south of the country is the Gulf of Guinea. So that's geographically, that's the position of Ghana. And I think that positioning helped a lot of the other things to happen, because Ghana has a lot of, about 50 forts and castles dotted along its coast. So Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. And the gold obviously attracted a lot of people.
European powers.
Initially they came to trade in gold, in ivory, and those things. So it started with the Portuguese, who came and they just wanted to trade, followed by all the others, the English, the French, the Danes, the Germans. The Germans didn't last long though, but they were there too. So all those came after that, and I think from the 15th century onwards, this history was getting more and more interesting, and I think it got most interesting with the arrival of the English, who sort of wrote about this Gold Coast and spread the word to other countries. And by then the slave trade was gaining ground. The transatlantic. We had a trans-Saharan slave trade, but then we had the transatlantic slave trade, which I think that was the worst one. And Ghana was not always the nation that we now have. When all these European traders and so on and explorers were coming in, Ghana was a group of ethnic groups. Some were more dominant, like the Ashantis, the Dagomba.
Okay, so there's nations in the nation state, is that correct? Is that it? Okay.
So what I'm saying is these were groups that were not together as a nation before colonialism. And this also explains the multiplicity of languages that the country has, because all these ethnic groups already had their languages, had their cultures before colonialism. And if there is anything that a people will not easily shed, it is their language and their culture. Language as the quintessential carrier of culture. So we had all these nations. And when the Gold Coast colony started, after they agreed to divide Africa, you take that, you take that, what they call
draw the border lines,
partition of Africa, where they arbitrarily drew the borders with, what suited them. No due regard for,
in a sense.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
you know, like
And went right across cultural
Yeah, right
boundaries.
across.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, they just went in and slashed and said, "You take that, we take this."
Can
More
you
than any other.
estimate how many cultural groups or languages even are in Ghana today?
About 50.
Oh, 50.
Linguists
Wow.
have put the number at about 50.
So, and you grew up speaking one or
grew
two or
up
three or some of
speaking-
them? I don't know.
4 or 5,
Did you?
yeah.
And how did you learn them? Why 4 or 5?
Because
in the primary language socialization, you learn 4 or 5 languages.
4 or 5 because my father's language is different. The language spoken in my father's village is different from the one spoken in my mother's village. So I grew up learning the
Bilingually.
Yes,
We could
because anytime I went to my mother's parents, they would insist on speaking their language to me, which is Nankani.
Okay.
And so I had to learn to respond in Nankani, which is good. I appreciate that now.
Yeah, okay.
Because thanks to that, I'm able to do a lot of other things.
Oh, yeah.
And my research can cover
And research among them.
areas.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Of course, when I went to school, then English.
Yeah, that would
was
be
just
my
going to
question.
ask.
So
And then
how
French.
come you speak English?
How come I speak English?
Yeah, is that school education or what is it?
Yes, I picked up, I think as a child, a child's ears, I picked up a few,
Chunks.
phrases here and there. And even my grandmother, my father's mother, she was this feisty old lady. And she would say, "Bloody fool."
That was her English repertoire? Okay.
Well, part of it.
Okay.
If you did something
Yeah.
naughty or mischievous, and especially with me, she would try to run after me, but she could never catch up with me. And then she would stop
She would
and
shout
say,
at you.
"Bloody fool." In the family, there was this extended family, all living in one big house with different apartments, and some of the older children were already in school.
Okay.
And they used to come with their books and some with the wooden slate and chalk. And I would sit there and, sort
Pick
of
up this and that.
fascinated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's how I didn't have parents who, my parents didn't go to school. Of course, my mother went to adult literacy classes and she can read in our language, which is fantastic. She holds her newspapers and she reads them in Kasam. English is the language of schooling.
Okay.
Well, English has a very interesting history in the schools. I think from around 1920, when we had one governor called Guggisberg, Frederick Gordon Guggisberg, quite a name. So Guggisberg set up what he called the Phelps-Stokes Commission, because before that, school was mostly the missionaries' affair. You had the Bremen missionaries in the Volta region to the east. You had the Basel. Your people were there. The Basel missionaries were working among the Akan. But you see, the Bremen and the Basel, they worked in the local languages. So even when they had schools, they were using the local languages. So the Bremen were using Ewe. So you had a lot of linguists and other missionaries who were there doing Bible translation, doing the catechism, and it was all in the local language.
Yes, in the local language.
They used the local language for the same reason that they needed people to understand the language of the Christian mission in their own language. And some of them also felt, look, if you take away their language, you have alienated them, and you may not succeed in getting them to. So this was the situation before Guggisberg. Now when Guggisberg came, he had this Phelps-Stokes commission to look into education, to develop a plan for education. And they came out with the language issue that they brought up in their report was that education for the primary school should be in the local languages, and then after that, it should be in English. And the idea was to give the child a good foundation in education in a language that child was familiar with. When Kwame Nkrumah came on the scene, when we got our independence, ironically, English was the medium of education throughout. From primary class 1 to
Why was that?
to university.
Education was felt to be something which concerned the state, or?
Well, you see, English had been used had been declared the official language. I think there were agitations for a national language, and there still are. So, among
so is nation building part of that idea of using one language across the nation?
Using one language, because 50 languages, trying to choose one, it's not impossible, but it's not an easy task for any government to do. But the local languages are now taught as subjects on the timetable.
So there's a foreign language.
Just like French.
Education. Like French, yeah.
Just like French.
Very interesting.
I learned French as a subject on the timetable, we even had English as a subject on the timetable too. Because we had to learn grammar, we had to learn writing. And
so English still is both. It's a foreign language that's taught
as a subject.
Instructing the language, and it's the language of instruction.
That's
very
the
interesting.
medium of instruction and also a subject.
Oh, okay.
At least up to the high school, it's compulsory. Beyond that, when you go into the universities, it is optional. You can decide to pursue English, or you can decide not to.
Okay.
But a good grade in English is required from the junior high school to the high school, and then from the high school to the university. My main interests are in one, earlier Ghanaian literature, and two, oral literature, and then children's literature.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are the three main areas, and I always go into it from a gender perspective, because my interest is in gender issues. Yes. So I have done research I started with Proverbs, because when I was an undergraduate, my professor told us to do something on our culture. I said, you Africans are the only people always busy selling other people's wares. Everyone else is busy selling their own wares. So go and do something on your own culture. So I went and did something on Proverbs, and it was very interesting the way people were sort of subverting and deconstructing Proverbs, which I hadn't noticed till I started looking into it. So I've worked on Proverbs for quite some time now. And then after that, I realized, children's literature, it used to be an interesting subject for a lot of scholars, but now almost nobody in Ghana is interested in children's literature. So there was one colleague who did her PhD on work on children's literature. So I collaborated with her on a few things, and then I just went on from there. I've now gone into the oral children's literature, and because more and more I'm getting interested in that, play songs and all types of things.
So are you recording them also and save them, as it were? Or?
Yeah, some of them.
Okay. Which is a major problem. They're not accessible because they're simply not.
They are not there.
Yeah.
I'm planning to do a book on children's play songs, and maybe do a CD with some children singing the songs and that kind of thing. Yeah. But I haven't reached there yet. And then while I was doing that, folk tales that I had collected for years ago, I hadn't even looked at them. And then I said, okay.
You also transcribed them also, did you?
Yeah, to transcribe them, and then look at what is in them, what it tells me about the people, their experiences, and all of that. So
that should be a treasure trove of some kind, the cultural treasure trove.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now our oral literature has almost been shot.
It's vanishing.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
No, well, the people are still performing it all over the place because they can't do without that. If they are marrying, there is poetry there.
Yeah. Okay.
If they are at a funeral, there's poetry there. They can't do away with their local. When they are sitting in front of the house and talking, the proverbs are brought in. It is what is proper for them, what is appropriate. So I don't think they will get rid of this anytime soon. I think what is happening is that this is not getting into the classrooms.
Because it's not recorded, right?
Because it is not, nobody is paying any attention to it. And the people who go and drum and recite their poetry and go home, and they are the only ones who listen to it and enjoy it. Nobody else cares. The rest of the world moves on. Now I'm into women's poetry too.
Ah, okay.
Because again, my aunt is a leader of one group, another aunt is a leader of another women's group, singing and reciting poetry. Ah, okay. And again, I realized nobody is paying attention to these women. Sometimes the radio people go and record them and go and play, but that's it. But when you listen to the songs, you realize they're saying so much here that school children could learn from. So somebody ought to be recording these so that the children can be introduced to them. Because a lot of the places they go to perform, the children are not there. They are in school or, they are not there most of the time to listen. So give them an opportunity to experience what. So I've recorded some of the women's songs and poems, and I'm transcribing them.
Okay. Very
profound statements that they are making, and I hope to come out with an anthology